will be recorded. And also, before we start with our presentation, I would like to kindly ask you to turn on your cameras and to make a joint photo of this webinar. Oh, I see many familiar faces. I'll make now a screenshot of all of us. Smiley faces. Thank you very much. One more.
Bonjour. Bonjour, merci. Alors, je suis sur 2 réunions. Je vais essayer de me...
Okay. So thank you very much. So I'm very pleased that today our colleague Federico will share some very important information regarding reporting requirements under UNFCCC on support needed and received. He will speak about modalities, procedures, and guidelines for Article 13 of the Paris Agreement, but also he will share with us some information about international practices in tracking climate finance, approaches and cases, potential methodologies in tracking climate finance and support. Also, in the second part of this event, we will have 2 countries, Sierra Leone and Georgia, to share their experience in tracking climate finance and support needed and received. So at this point, I would like kindly to ask our colleague Federico to start with to introduce himself and to start with his presentation. Federico, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very, very much, Slađana, and welcome all of you to this webinar on climate support and including some aspects of climate finance.
Sorry, Federico, sorry, just a second. Sorry, just please, dear participant, mute your microphones since we cannot hear Federico. Thank you very much. Mute your microphones, please. Thank you.
Well, thank you all again. And I think I'll keep the introduction short. My name is Federico Antonio Cano. Slađana already introduced me. I work for the UNEP Copenhagen Climate Center. So I'm based in Copenhagen, Denmark. And I've been working for a long time now on aspects related to climate change. I mainly focus on aspects of climate finance. And then as part of this, also on aspects of transparency. So the reporting requirements on support needed and received for developing countries as a focus. So without further ado, I think we have a lot of ground to cover today. So I'll just jump straight to the presentations. I have 2 of them. The first one is the shorter one where I will talk about the reporting requirements. So presenting what the modalities, procedures, and guidelines for Article 13 say countries should report. And then after this first presentation comes questions and answers, and I will go through a longer presentation afterwards, presenting some approaches, potential methods, and aspects to consider when assessing climate finance at the national level and reporting on support needs and received. So I hope you can all see my screen at this stage, and hopefully also in presentation mode.
Yes, yes, we can see it.
So there are 2 main aspects. I'll talk first about the modalities, procedures, and guidance, and present then the common tabular formats, which are sort of the vehicles that are sort of standardized for all countries, where countries will report data in a standardized manner. So there are some aspects which are reported in a narrative format and some in tabular format. And the tabular format are sort of the streamlined aspects. So first of all, just some background. When we talk about transparency in the context of the convention, we talk about different types of transparency, MRV of emissions. We all know the gas inventories. We talk about MRV of climate action. We used to talk about NAMAs. Now we talk about the NDC implementation. And then MRV of support. So the transparency, the enhanced transparency framework is actually called the transparency framework for action and support. The support is just as an important aspect, and support from developing countries has been a part of the negotiation since the start. So that there's also some commitments, and this is part of the reporting and transparency aspect that will also provide inputs to reporting on the sort of global commitments. But today we will focus more on the national aspects of transparency. So first of all, it's important to note that there is no real common agreed upon. And if participants could please mute yourself. I don't know, Slajana, I think you could also mute them on your end. Yeah. Anyway, I'll try to continue.
That is it. What's enough? Yes. In the group. Yes. So all is well.
So I hope you can hear me better now. But yes, coming back to the presentation. So there is no clear agreed upon definition about what climate finance is, or even support. So it hinges a lot to what the countries themselves.
You are muted. We cannot hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
I think I was also muted in the process. Thank you for noting that. So again, so there is no clear, commonly agreed upon definition about what climate finance is and what climate support, financial support is. So it's very much up to the countries themselves to define how they look at it and what information to report. But there are some sort of general trends, you could say, about the approach that different institutions and countries take. So usually when we talk about climate finance, we talk about, in general, all climate-related investments. So we look at potentially public, private, national, and international. Some countries, although, prefer to look at it as financial flows from developed to developing countries for climate change mitigation and adaptation activities. This is how, in general terms, support is identified as well. Other countries have expressed the need to look at the incrementality or the additionality of support for climate. Depending on a country's own focus, that could also be a way to look at it. But in the end, what is critical is that countries provide the information about how they have defined climate finance and or climate support, because without that, it's sort of hard to make this global comparison, so the stock take at the global level. This is, I'll not dwell too long into this. This is just to show that climate finance, when we talk about climate finance, we talk about a variety of sources. This is a quite complex figure, but basically on the left column here, it shows the sources, potential sources of climate finance, then potential financial instruments, and then what sort of scope, mitigation, adaptation, or cross-cutting, and then the intended use in terms of sectors, what kind of sectors these finance flows flow towards. So when we look at the sources, usually when we talk about financial support, we focus on the blue aspects. so public sources of finance from a developing country perspective. Although we'll come back to that later, on the other side, when developed countries report on financial support provided, they report on financial support provided and mobilized. So they also tap into the orange aspects of climate finance. So there is inherently a sort of different approach to what developing countries report and what developed countries will report. So it might be hard then at the sort of global level to make a balanced budget where the sort of finance provided or support provided and support received match to each other. And we will look at other aspects of that later as well. So now we can focus on support. Since we talked about finance, it's important to note that reporting on support in the BTRs is not mandatory. So if you're very busy and you want to prioritize where you focus your efforts, this might be something that you want to leave for later, but I still think that reporting on support needs and support received is quite important. And we'll go through some of these aspects and why it can be very important for countries to report. But in general, I think, so I mentioned the challenges about comparing the two aspects, but the modalities, procedures, and guidelines, so the MPGs here, at least what they do is that they provide a more detailed, streamlined way that both developed and developing countries will report this information. So we'll, in the end, when the BTRs start coming in, I think we will have a much more complete and structured overview of the financial flows, hopefully, but still not mandatory. So why should we map the support received? Of course, it assists us in complying with the reporting requirements. Then I think from a national perspective, having this overview at the national level, it can help countries identify the sources where they receive the support from and potentially identify some underutilized vehicles. So there are plethora of potential donors, bilateral, multilaterals, etc. So having this overview might help you realize where you could also look for additional funds. It can also help to verify and evaluate the information about the support provided from developed countries. And that can provide inputs to the COPs, basically, to the discussion about how finance is provided, what is it used for, what really constitutes climate finance and financial support that countries receive versus what countries report they have provided. It can also provide some lessons about the different experiences, about how the finance has been utilized, the results achieved, and the different financial instruments that have been used and their effectiveness. And of course, improve confidence, transparency, and accountability, part of sort of the reason why the enhanced transparency framework was established. Looking at the support received and how it's been used, so basically the impacts, it helps also understand how the support is utilized and maybe potentially focus the support to where you can get the most out of the funds that you can receive. So assess whether it's effective and focus on most effective type of approaches, and also facilitate the development of policies to enhance further climate finance. So when you have data, you can report back to decision makers, which can then take strategic decisions to enhance climate finance. So that was support received. Support needed, which I'll come back to that, which is a sort of a more difficult animal to address. But I think mapping support needed is, if not as relevant, more relevant. Of course, for your own national planning, and climate finance strategies to achieve your NDC targets. Assessing climate finance needs basically provides you an overview of which resources are available, what resources will be needed to achieve your NDCs, and then you could make more targeted effort to attract those that finance to implement the NDCs. It also has this assessment of support needed helps you identifying the barriers for investment in climate action and strategize and look for ways to unlock the investment needed towards a low carbon development and the achievement of the NDC, and also to attract more financial support. So being more specific about what types of support needed, amounts, what type of financial instruments you're looking for will help you will help you in the matchmaking with the donors. So now that we covered the sort of background, we dive into the reporting requirements described in the modalities, procedures, and guidelines. As I mentioned, there are requirements are divided into narrative formats and tabular formats. So first, the narrative format, there are some general aspects to cover. So first of all, the national circumstances and institutional arrangements for reporting on support needed and received, and then some sub aspects that further are specified in the modalities, procedures, and guidelines. Actually, I'll take a step back. It's important to know that many of these aspects were already covered by the current reporting requirements under national communications and BURs. I would say that the BTR requirements basically provide more guided information about which aspects are relevant to report on. So yes, back to the national circumstances, the systems and processes used to identify, track, and report, including potential challenges and limitations. Then we can make plans for future improvements. What are the priorities and strategies in relation to support needs and also to track support received? And then there is a long list of aspects which are deemed relevant to report on. And this relates back to the lack of sort of agreed upon definitions and methods to approach the tracking and reporting on support. So since countries might have a different way about how they go about it and define financial support, technology development and transport support, and capacity building support, it's important that countries report on their assumptions, definitions, and methodologies used to provide the information that they report in the BTR. There's a long list of aspects. Some of these are related to the reporting elements that we will see later on in the common tabular formats. But I think, first of all, the definitions and the methods are quite important. And I'll get back to some of these aspects during the presentation. But you will also, I guess, Snejana, circulate the presentation so the participants can look more into the specific details. And there are also, of course, the modalities, procedures, and guidelines that provide this information as well that you can use as reference. Then I mentioned financial support, but financial support is only one aspect. So there is technology development and transfer and capacity building support, and then dedicated support for transparency. So this is more textual format reporting requirements that are outlined in the MPGs. So the support needed to fulfill the NDC, how the support will contribute to the NDC and to the long-term goals of the Paris Agreement, a description of the sectors and their needs and support received. And then on technology development and transfer, there is related to technology needs assessment. So which are the plans, needs, and priorities? The needs to develop basically local, national capacities and technologies, existing case studies as relevant, how support received or the one thought needed would contribute to technology development and transfer, and the stage of the technology cycle supported. So when we talk about technology development transfer, we usually talk about the technology cycle. The ones of you that have participated in technology needs assessment might be a repetition for you, but basically you have the development, research and development, basically demonstration, cases, pilots, deployment, how it's diffused, and then transfer from countries to your own country. Then on capacity building support, the approach to enhance capacity building support, the capacity building needs, constraints, and gaps, also in gaps in communicating the needs. So the need for capacity needs assessment that so basically if the overview is not there, it's hard to express these needs. It can also be related to quantification of financial support between technology development, transfer, and capacity building needs, and how that translates into financial support needed. Then public awareness about climate and access to information related to capacity building, where that can be sourced. Case studies, how the support has enhanced capacities, and capacity building support received at different levels of government. Then for transparency, there is a specific dedicated aspect of the support for transparency. So it relates very much to the CBIT project, which is providing this platform, but basically support needed and received for preparing reports pursuant to Article 13. So the BTRs, the adaptation communications, inventories, and so forth. Support needed and received for addressing the areas of improvement. So basically, when you will go through the technical expert review, there will be some, well, probably there will be some areas of improvements and recommendations. So the specific needs and support received in relations to that. So this is quite a too quick walkthrough of the textual format requirements, but you will have this information with you and you can review it in good time. These come, and then comes the tabular formats. And the tabular formats, there are many tables. I will not go through them one by one. I will give you an overview at the end of presenting the tables. But basically, there is a table for financial support needed. There is a table for financial support needs, a table for technology development and transfer support needed, and one for received, capacity building support needed, and one for received, and then one for transparency related support. And I'll just highlighted the first one and some specific information to be reported here that we'll come back to later. But I think a lot of the information requested will be fairly easy for most countries to report on, but there are some aspects that might be difficult for some. Looking at, I mean, having worked with a variety of countries, I see that sometimes, especially on the support needs side, there is maybe lacking information and data on the expected amounts in terms of needs, which type of financial instruments are requested, and then also the expected use impacts and estimated result of the support. And then again, I'll just run through, and we'll come back to these aspects in the next presentation. So as mentioned, these are the tables. You will have them, and the electronic format will be released soon, so you will be able to report in electronic format as well, but this provides the overview. And here is basically a summary of the different tables. You can see the different colored columns. The first one is financial support needs. The second is financial support received. The third one is the technology development transfer needs. The fourth one is the received. Then capacity building needs, capacity building received, and then transparency related support. And you can say there are many of the common aspects of the information requested. So of course, the title of the program, project, or expected project or support, its description. Then for financial support received, there is the channel from where the funds have come from, who was the recipient entity and implementing entity. For technology development transfer, of course, there is a specification of technology. For the financial and technical support, it's also about amounts. For all of them, it's expected or actual time frame. For the financial support is also about which financial instruments are being used or expected. Their status, if they're committed or received funds. The type of support, so basically, if it goes towards mitigation, adaptation, or cross-cutting, sector and subsector. And for financial support, this is where cross-cutting aspect, cross-referencing aspects come, and it's basically to avoid duplication and double counting. So basically, we will not report values in technology aspects and capacity building aspects. We only report values in financial aspects. And then the status of the activity for the support received, if it's planned, ongoing, or completed. Of course, if it's related to the NDC, and expected or achieved impacts and results for all. And as I mentioned, this might be looking more complex than it is, but basically on the finance, we report mainly all support on the financial support as needed, and then we can report separately technology development and transfer if you didn't receive financial support. But in cases you receive financial support for technology development transfer or capacity building, you can just cross-reference between the tables. So basically, if a financial support has contributed to technology development and transfer or capacity building, you will have the possibility to say it has contributed to it, and then you report on that specific activity, you report on the technology development and transfer or capacity building aspects. Then it's though important to basically make sure you don't double count, because you're requested to provide information on the estimated or amounts of funds related to transparency support. So the cross-referencing allows you to not double count between financial support and technology and capacity, but just make sure that you only report amounts either on transparency or financial support to avoid double counting. So this is a maybe too fast walkthrough of the reporting requirements, but we'll, I think, shed more light on them in the second presentation, where we'll try to put it more into context. But some main take-out points: reporting on support needs and support received is not mandatory. The enhanced transparency frameworks and its modalities, procedures, and guidelines provide much more detailed guide on what information is relevant to provide. So we hope that we will have more streamlined information between all the parties. But there are still some remaining challenges, because there are a variety of methods and approaches that can potentially be used. There can be challenges with institutional arrangements and capture all the sort of data and information that we would like. And then we see that there is quite some need, at least on the, especially on the support needs, to establish some processes internally that will enable countries to effectively map these aspects. And I hope I haven't overextended my time too much, but this was it for the first presentation.
Thank you much, Federico. This was very quick, but very also extensive, and I hope in enough details. for participants to see one structure, possible structure for reporting climate finance support needed and received, and especially the link with the previous reporting tools and requirements, so to better understand why we suppose or have to report, whether we will report on climate finance, is that our interest to do that, to report on climate received, to inform actually on climate finance needed and support needed, etc., etc. So thank you very much. It was very important as an initial step for understanding future potential systems that countries can implement in their own reports in preparation of their BTR. So now we have time dedicated for your questions. You can just simply raise your hand or maybe put your question in the chat box. My colleague Sheila will track the chat boxes and your questions. We have a question from George. George, please, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, both of you, for presentation and for the possibility to ask question. So my question is in regarding to, let's say, have a hypothetical situation where we report between two BTRs. So which information do we capture in between? So as a sum of, let's say, support received in the last 5 years, or even more, or only between these two cycles of reporting. So thank you so much.
So, I mean, ideally, and this is not the official UNFCCC talking, but ideally we will have a frequency of biannual reporting from all countries. That is the intent. So as we approach that frequency, it would be a 2-year cycle. So what has happened in the last 2 years? Now, we also need to acknowledge that this is the first BTR. So, I mean, I would say that the more data you can provide, the better. Later on, and that again depends on how, and I will give an example later on how one country considers maybe to report on support received, depending on the financial instrument received. So basically, if you get a loan, they would think that the loan is reported as support received during the first year, the whole at its face value. But then as the repayment comes in, they would subtract that support received from the loan because it's their own national funds that go towards repaying the loan. So they don't see that they would basically subtract from the support received. That's one of the messages I received from one of the countries. And for that to happen, you would have to report on the whole duration of the loan, basically. So if they really want to implement that, their reporting timeline would be much longer, at least for some support components, let's say. So it really boils down to how the countries, what type of approaches and methods they want to implement, which it's a very annoying answer to give because it's not a straightforward answer, but it really much depends on how you yourself will make your definitions and methods and approaches. But I would say that ideally you would then with time have a 2-year cycle. You could even incorporate this loan aspects and just basically make updates to the previous BTR. There could be ways of doing this, I think. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you very much, Federico. Thank you, George, for your question. We have one more question from Vils Agricole.
Yes, good
Vils,
afternoon. Yeah, good afternoon. I just want to some clarity regarding the definition of climate finance, because there's so many definitions, and as mentioned by the presenter, it's us, the country, to decide But for us, there is a dilemma. What is the difference between climate finance and development finance? Because at times we get an extreme weather event which affects our development, and then we seek for assistance, support. Then we get development support, but then they still say it's climate finance support. So can you just clarify this a little bit? Thank you.
Yes, and I think it will be even more clear in the next presentation. But basically, you're taking the developed country perspective. They have a specific method that they apply, which basically, when they provide support, they tag the support provided. So let's say development assistance is the big bag, and then within that, they tag dedicated climate support. So it's, let's say, a subcategory within development assistance for them. That's how they see it. Now, from your own perspective, again, some countries have expressed that they would like to see climate finance as additional finance to official development assistance. And how do you really track that? Then it's up to the country to put out a system that maybe tracks, make a differentiations. Maybe tracks, another way could be the addition. If you look at only the additionality of it, look at financial flows in the past, and then look at additional financial flows that come in with time that have a dedicated climate component. So, I mean, all countries, they're sovereign countries. That's how the UN functions. So it's basically up to the countries themselves to decide. From the developed country perspective, there is a common approach, which has its own limitations as well, and I will talk more about it in the next presentation.
Thank you much, Federico. Thank you, Willis, for your question. We have one more question from Mr. Ion, Commandant.
Thank you very much for information you provided. One question to you. When you were speaking about the financing received, support received, you mean engagements or effectively received money?
Yes, so that is actually a question that is posed by the reporting tables as well. So if they enable you to classify if it's a commitment or if it's actually dispersed, basically. Have you received it in your accounts, or is it a commitment and it's not there yet? So you can report both, and you can make that distinction within the reporting tables. I think that was what the question was referring to. Am I correct?
Yeah, but in the table you provided, there is not information of commitments.
Okay, maybe I can go back to it if it helps. So here on the status, if you can see this line, I don't know if you have, do I have a pointer that you can see?
Yeah. We can see your pointer.
The status, which is requested for financial support received, it basically says that you can differentiate between committed or received. Received is basically if it's come into your national accounts, while committed, if there is a commitment from the donor, but potentially not having entered your accounts yet.
Yeah, but this line in fact say is one or second commitment or receive. But in the table, more detailed tables, we do not have the columns devoted to commitments and effectively received, only received.
Well, I'm not sure if I understand the question correctly then, but I will go back to the table itself. And maybe that
Yeah,
could
you
shed-
have in your report a table, more detailed here,
Yes.
right? Why is this commitment?
It's here. So when you report on a specific program, and then you report on the funds, you can then communicate if it's committed or if you have received them.
Yeah, but in the same time, we have commitment and receive. For example, commitment for 5 years, and for first, second, yes, we receive money. How to
Yeah.
report them?
That's, well, again, I think it's up to you, but you can report 2 lines with the same title. So you could create 1 line with the received amount and 1 line with the committed amount that has not been disbursed yet. You could also have an approach where in your method you some countries, let's say, in some countries where it's the Ministry of Finance that has the overview of the funds that come in, and they do the reporting so far through their national accounts, then they get an overview of which funds that have entered the country. And they use that. And they would only report on the received and not the committed one, for instance. So it's sort of up to the country how in detail the information they want to provide. There is also the field of additional information. So it really depends on the time and effort that you can spend doing this, the systems that you have in place to track the relevant information. And I would say, if you have a system that capture all of this, it would be great if that could be included in the tables. If not, you basically start with what you have and report what you can.
I can just add that nobody expects that your first report will be perfect, and you will improve your information from time to time. But also, as Federico says, it is much dependent on the national circumstances, institutional arrangements, and basic line from your starting point, actually, of the data collection, data tracking, data reporting, etc. So maybe we can, do we have more questions? It was one more, but
yeah. Slađana, we have also some questions from the chats from Morocco, Naima and Khadija. So Naima, in case the climate finance technology support and capacity building in BTR are reviewed, how the review is expected to be undertaken, especially as you highlighted that this specific reporting is not mandatory. The second question is the reporting on support needed and received an obligation for developing countries. In case their BTR does not include this information, are there any recommendations for them for reviewers?
So, I mean, the technical expert review will review the information, and there is a distinction between basically looking at the mandatory reporting requirements and the non-mandatory reporting requirements. So if you haven't reported all the sort of elements for the support, or even not have reported those elements, there'll just be a note acknowledging that. But then, of course, countries are asked to have continuous improvements in the reporting. So there might be a sort of communication with you and the technical experts about challenges and potential ways to improve it. But as it's not mandatory, there will be less focus on that, of course, than other mandatory aspects. And the second question, I don't know if could you repeat that?
Is the reporting on support needed and received an obligation for developing countries? It's not.
No, it's not mandatory.
It's not.
But, yeah.
There is,
thank you, Federico.
in case their BTR doesn't include this information, are there any recommendations for them from reviewers?
Again, the reviewers basically look at they look for if the information is there, and then the recommendation that they may make is to ask the country to report information, but they will not provide you with information on how to do it. So that's not sort of within the scope of the technical expert review. On how to do it, then there are the different initiatives like the CBIT GSP, other transparency-related initiatives where you can, I mean, when you have identified your gaps and challenges, you can then request support on guidance on how to do it. But that's not part of the sort of technical expert review process.
Okay, thank you, Federico. Thank you very much for your answers, and participants for the questions. You can continue asking questions in the chat box. Now we will continue with the next presentation, where Federico will share with us information about international practices in tracking climate finance, some approaches, cases, and potential methods in tracking climate finance and support. But maybe from these specific examples from international practice, you will learn more specific details that you are also now interested to learn. So, Federico, are you ready to continue?
Yes. And again, it will be a tour de force again. Apologies if I'll go quickly through these aspects, but this presentation actually has two sub-presentations again. So first of all, look into how donors see and report support provided, which might give you a perspective and make you think about your own perspective that you would like to take. Which challenges then come out of these current diverse approaches, and then talk a little bit about institutional structures and potential institutional structures from our own observations. And then we have a sub presentation on approaches to track support received. I'll start with support received because I think that's the easier one, and then end up with approaches to track support needed. So how donors see support? They look at support provided with a common, and they use a common approach to report that, which is called the RIO markers. Some of you are probably aware of this already, but it's basically a quite, I mean, the good thing about it is that it's common for all developed countries. The bad thing about it is that even with this common approach, there are different than sub-approaches the country take, and also it might not be very detailed, and at times not very transparent. But what the RIO markers basically do is that they look at the sort of support programs that donors implement and provide, and then they just basically tag this support and ask, is this support related to climate? Yes or no? If it's related to climate, is climate the primary objective of the support? If it's yes, it would be principle, usually that basically assign the full value of the program as support provided for climate. If it's no, if it's partially related to climate, but if, I mean, climate is just a component or a subcomponent, then it's a significant climate commitment, and then they assign a percentage of the total value of the program to it. And if I'll go back to this database, the OECD DAC statistics, where you can find more information. So in addition to this support provided, donors also report on financial support provided and mobilized. So if you think back at the global commitment of the 100 billion, that is support provided and mobilized. And what does that mean? That it's not only the funds that come from the sort of public funds that developed countries then transfer or provide as support to implement programs, but it's also basically funds that unlock private investments. Usually, especially in the case of the developing countries, investments are related with risks, and basically a lot of investment don't happen because of the risk profile projects. So it can be certain type of guarantees that then allow banks or private actors to make investments. And if they can capture this information, that is also reported as part of the sort of funds that have been mobilized. Now back to the Rio markers. As I mentioned, and this is an old reference, but it still counts as that. Basically, it's even though the Rio marker approach is common, countries have a slightly different approach on what they report. So again, the difference between commitments and disbursements, some report both, some countries report only disbursements, some only commitments. And then they apply different percentages of how many of the funds are considered climate funds if the support provided is only significant and not the primary objective of the program. So even with the same approach, there are then different end results, you would say, depending on the sub-approach that the countries take. So it's not an exact science necessarily. Then if we go to developing countries, there isn't even the same approach used with Rio markers. And again, this is an old reference, but I think it's, from my observation, is still quite valid, that countries are able to report very different types of information when they report on the support received. A lot of the bilateral support and multilateral climate funds we see there is recurrently reported, but a lot of the other information is sort of dispersed. And I think at least the reporting tables, I think, will guide countries into what type of information to report, and ideally these figures will be much more streamlined in the future. So looking at institutional arrangements, from what I've seen so far, I think most countries take a sort of a top-down centralized approach. In many cases, it's the Ministry of Finance that provides the information to the Ministry of Environment or Climate Change departments. In many countries, there is a climate change committee. So the Ministry of Environment then communicates to the committee about reporting on the support provided. Usually that comes, a lot of it, from the Ministry of Finance. But when it comes to the support needs, the climate change departments or the Ministry of Environment need to then interact with the ministries, either through a climate change committee or directly to each line ministry and request information about support needs for implementing their NDC in their own sectors. In some instances, there have been NDC finance strategies or other that have sort of provided that information as well. But then depending on the sort of type of information that countries want to track, there are a variety of potential decentralized data sources. In some cases, countries also would like to track domestic climate finance, and there the local financial institutions and also the private sector becomes very important. So it depends really on what you want to achieve and the scope of your tracking. Okay, I'll try to continue. I think that having the full overview can be quite useful for countries to also track the national sources of climate finance and climate investments, especially when assessing the support needs. And I'll get back to that later. So what we've so far talked about support as sort of one direction in the terms of support coming from developed countries to developing countries. When it comes to climate finance needs specifically, I think broadening the perspective and look at climate finance more broadly becomes relevant. But yes, coming back to institutional arrangements, this is just an example on how it's structured in Colombia. So Colombia has a national climate change system with an intersectoral commission on climate change, and they have a subcommittee on financial management, which is composed of a variety of ministries, departments, secretariats, and financial institutions, and also academia, which forms the basis of the climate finance MRV system that they have. And they basically both work with collecting the information for both financial support received and also to establish the financial support needs in the country. And they don't only track support, but they also track climate finance more broadly, as I mentioned. And I'll try to explain these figures. It's not as complex as it seems, but what they basically do, they collect this information and they make it publicly available. So they are able to track their own climate finance from the public sector, private sector investments to climate, and then public international climate finance, which includes basically, this is where the support aspects is in, and then they subdivide it by different sources and so forth. And then they can make different types of analysis if it goes for adaptation, mitigation, other or cross-cutting, or both, I mean. Now, how did they do this? They actually didn't start from scratch. So they have a variety of national registries and systems. The Ministry of Finance has some data and information. They have a registry on companies that provide some data and information. They have registry on ownership structures, I think, both in terms of buildings that is connected to other systems. They have registries for transport, and they basically combine all this data and extract the financial information. So they did a very, let's say, comprehensive tagging exercise between the national systems that they already had available, and basically went and tagged in this system, this is climate, this is climate, this is climate. And then they were able to merge then this information into this interface. This is just an example of institutional arrangements in Mauritius, which are basically defined by their Climate Change Act, which gives then the Department of Climate Change the mandate to look for approaches for monitoring, evaluation, and reporting, and also to define action plans and investment programs. So investment programs, this is where you will get a lot of the aspects of climate finance needs. And this is where you can extract aspects of support needs. While the MRV also basically forces them to think about how do we then track and extract data on financial support received. And this is where, through their Interministerial Council of Climate Change, will interact with the Ministry of Finance and extract this information. They also have established an online system where all this information will be reported. So this is for the first part, but in general, we have some challenges. We have a lack of common definitions, methods, and approaches. So again, it's up to the countries to classify climate finance and climate support. When it comes to institutional arrangements, it's quite relevant to first identify where are the mandates. So who has the mandate to track certain data, who has the mandate to collect and report then the climate data to the UNFCCC, and then create sort of data management or information sharing structures between these institutions. And to do that, you also need to look at where the data is. So who has access to the data? and structure the arrangements around that. I'll not take questions and answers now. I'll take it by the end of all the presentations. So let me go straight to the approaches to assess support received. Look at assigning climate components, basically like the RIO markers, what they do. And then we look at other aspects, so concessionality, for instance, and might be one of the things that you would like to look into when you map the support received. So climate support received, what is it? We have financial support, which is basically funds received in country accounts transferred. For many, that's what they are looking for so far, because that is the data they have. Some, as mentioned, have also data on the commitments. And it really depends on the country's own definition. Also, these financial support lines that you can identify in your own national budgets will most probably include activities related to technology development, transfer, and capacity building, and transparency. So it's important to keep in mind how to differentiate that, or at least extract some information on the technology development and transfer and capacity building, and also avoid the double counting with the transparency. When we talk about technology development and transfer, we might go beyond that. So not only looking at support in terms of funds, in terms of money that is received in country accounts or committed, it can be technology development and transfer programs where funds are not transferred directly, but still technology development and transfer is provided, or technical assistance is provided without the funds ever reaching the countries, but delivered through other agencies, institutions, or modalities. And the same with capacity building. And the same with transparency support. So in some cases, we might expect that the transparency-related support reporting table might not have values in them as well. Then coming back to the RIO markers, how you can use them. I mean, it's a simple approach. You can use the same if you're not tagging or tracking climate dedicated support received yet. You could opt for a similar approach. It's, I would say, an easy approach, but maybe not so detailed, or you would prefer to have it more detailed. And this is just an example that the Climate Public Expenditure Institutional Review methodology uses, amongst other. They subdivide then climate projects or programs into a more subdivided range of percentages that they assign to the budgets, and they provide a description. So that could be used as guidance as well. And you can find the method, the Climate Public Expenditure and Institutional Review method online. And if you would like to have that, you can also reach out and I can direct you to it. Then the more, let's say, comprehensive and more detailed practice would be to look at sort of all the support programs that enter into the country and look at each individual component or activity and look for what is really climate relevant. I mean, there are examples of COVID recovery support programs that are then where half of their multi-million-dollar value is tagged as climate support provided by developed countries. But would that value really have been that big if you look down at each subcomponent in that program and really identified the climate dedicated components? I would say I doubt that. So if you want to be more precise and have a better overview, you could use that, but it's more complex and more time requiring. And then there is the aspect of concessionality. I touched upon it during the questions and answers. So basically, when we look at the support provided, reported from developed countries, countries and climate funds and financial institutions report loans, so a variety of financial instruments as support provided. But when you look at it, a large proportion of these loans are non-concessional. So basically they are offered at market rates. And you could question what the financial support component of such a loan then would be. I mean, in some cases, the risk profile for certain investment in countries makes it so that no financial institution is interested in providing loans for such investments. And then a climate fund might come in and be willing to take that risk, provide the loan at commercial rates, and that investment wouldn't have happened without them. So I would personally classify it as support in certain situations, but in other, where the financial support provided is just a non-concessional loan that could have been sourced from other sources, then you could also, depending on your own definition, aspect of it. This is just for you to consider. So a way could also be some countries have expressed that they will look at, for instance, for loans as an instrument, they will look at what can I get the loan for in the market at market rates, and what does the climate fund provide it at, and then they take the difference between those two as the support component. So really depends on how you want to approach it. This is just a reference to a database, so the OECD database, where you can extract the information that the countries report of the support provided, where you can get that. If you don't have your own system yet, at least that's a place where you could start. At least it provides you the year, the provider, amounts, the scope, sector and subsector, the financial instrument, and a short description, which is aligned to at least some of the reporting lines in the tables. So that's at least a place to start. And I'm already behind time, so take-home points. Basically, there are some databases where you can start, but it's up to you to make your own assessment and make your own decision about what you consider as support. If you apply weights to programs, consider how you assign weights to different type of activities, and consider how you approach different financial instruments. So, how to assess support needs? So, support needs. In theory, you could say that support needs are defined by the total investment needs to achieve your NDC. And those investments, depending what type of investment we're talking about, could come from public, private, national, or international, and a mix of those. But basically looking at the total investments and then subtract the available or expected national contribution. So basically what you can use from your own national budget, what can come from your own national private sector. And then the difference between the two, in theory, would be the support needs that you have. But in practice, that's actually quite more complex. So I see that a lot of countries so far have reported, in terms of financial needs, the full size of the investment, so the full costing of their NDC. And that provides sort of some information of this size, but it doesn't provide much information about what is actually the support needs. Because we know that in a lot of countries, regardless of having conditional or conditional components, a lot of national investment will flow towards NDC-related actions or investments, both from the public budgets and from the private sector. So in some cases, it's about looking at what sort of barriers are there to achieve the full NDC. Why aren't investments happening at such a large enough scope to achieve the NDC, at least that we can foresee? and what is then the support needed to address those barriers. They can also be related to technology and capacity. Other aspects could also be to look at the concessional aspects, but in terms of reporting support needs, I would say I tend towards looking at the middle one of these three approaches. I think that is where countries can gather more information that is useful for themselves to strategize about how to approach the potential donors and financial support providers and what targeted support is requested. So that is sort of the approach that I will go through here. But to get there, you also need to have an understanding of the full size of the investments needed. So this is sort of a stepwise approach that I believe countries should consider in order to assess and report support needs. So first of all, you need to know what the investments, the full investment costs will be. So an NDC costing exercise will be needed to map the costs, investments needs for the NDC, action by action. Then translate the policies and programs into activity data. For some, I mean, NDCs are not only dedicated investment projects, there are in many cases policies, strategies, assessments in there. But basically, to make a full costing, you would have to translate those policies and programs and see what does that mean in terms of investments. And then on top of that, to achieve those, what are the technology and capacity needs? What are the technology and capacity barriers that we need to address, and what would it cost to address them? And then assign a value to these aspects. And it's only in 3 bullets here, but it's not an easy exercise, and I'm quite aware of that. Then when we have the full costs or the investment needs, we need to acknowledge that climate action doesn't only come at a cost. A lot of the climate actions that countries propose in their NDCs will actually generate positive cash flows. So climate action is not only cost, but there will be some benefits out of it. So for each of those actions, we need to also assess not only what are the investments, but what will be then the returns that come in, and compare these costs and benefits. When we have this overview, then we get a better idea of what are the costs, what are the benefits, and then we need to make an overview of what national sources of finance are available and what can we expect can be implemented or invested in through the national budget and private sector investments. That's not an easy task either. But when we have this overview, we can then be more precise about what type of support we need. And this is where the investment barriers come in. So in many cases, the national contribution for the investments, I mean, it can be available or at least be in potential. I mean, especially when we talk about the private sector could be willing to invest, but the current conditions inhibit them from investing. And this is where it's useful to look at what are the financial investment barriers. In some cases, it can be, for many countries, it's a high cost of capital. So the interest rates that the banks provide, which is related to the risk profile of the investment, but also in some cases, especially if technologies or other things need to be imported, can be related to currency exchange issues or fluctuating currency exchanges. In some cases, it's about the long-term nature of the investment and payback times. So the private sector is not necessarily interested. The expected return on the investments or the level of indebtedness or already indebtedness, which prevents the private sector or even the public sector sometimes in accessing finance. And this is where you can start more a more detailed description of your specific support needs. And this is where I think you would have a higher chance of targeting donors more specifically. So having just a full overview of the total investment need doesn't really tell donors where they can focus their support for enabling NDC implementation. But when you have done this exercise of having the full investment costs, looking at potential revenue streams, and looking at then what is preventing the investment from happening, this is where you can formulate more precise strategies and also identify financial instruments requested, which is part of the reporting requirements. So I will not go through them in detail, but financial instruments, we basically talk about grants, cash in hand that you don't need to repay. Sometimes you need to repay, but there are usually no interest related to it. We talk about loans. It can be at market rate or concessional loans. When you talk concessional loans, they have usually lower interest rate or longer tenures, or it can be also longer grace periods. So you need to start repaying at a later time. There can be different lines of credits. So green credit lines, for instance, they're dedicated to climate. Then there are guarantees. So basically a guarantor that comes in and works almost like an insurance, basically comes in, and in case a loan defaults, for instance, they would come in and pay a full or part of the loan to the entity that has provided the loan. If a guarantee exists, usually that really contributes to improving the access to finance. So financial institutions are much more likely to provide loans if there is a guarantee in place, and even lower the cost of finance. And then equity is direct investment in assets, so you become a co-owner in the investment. And basically, what I'm trying to say is that identifying barriers for investments also helps you identify appropriate financial instruments, and more specifically, what type of support that would be requested. So, for instance, if you, through your assessment of the specific NDC action, you identify that for this specific NDC action, the high implementation cost is an issue. And the high implementation cost is an issue because the technology is unproven. Then a pilot grant could be something that you could request, for instance. When it's a high cost of finance, interest rates are high, you can look for green credit lines with lower interest rates. You can look for, oh, sorry, that was too fast. You could look for guarantees to lower the interest rate if it's access to finance at all, because the risk profile investment is too high. Guarantees is quite useful as well. And here's also where you can identify some of the sort of technology related and capacity building support related needs. So if there is lack of capacity in a targeted sector or technology, you could look for grants for technical support, for instance. Yes, and again, guarantees can lower the cost of finance. Pilot grants as well can provide evidence which can then lower the cost of finance in the future. So instruments can also be correlated, but the main aspect is basically identifying financial barriers and barriers for investments can help you identify the right financial instruments and be more specific at the support needs. There's quite a lot of information. It looks chaotic, but basically what I'm trying to say is that different financial instruments are also appropriate for different types of investments. So basically, if you're looking at investments in renewable energy technologies, usually grants is not the way to go. Usually grants is not what donors will look for to provide. Grants are usually provided for technical assistance activities, capacity building activities, maybe pilots and showcases. But when we talk about investment in things that generate revenue, we usually talk about loans. So debt finance is usually what is provided. There can be guarantees that also guarantee potential revenues, or at least prevent debt providers to experience losses or parts of their losses, which can be quite useful. And also, it's at least for mitigation, for the adaptation that can be it's more probable, because many adaptation actions don't generate returns, or at least hard to monetize returns. But financial support for operation and maintenance is unrealistic. It could be part of a sort of concessional loan for the investment in general, but operation and maintenance costs are usually not supported in the long run, because donors and financiers look for actions that are self-sustaining over time. So when we have this overview, we can then assign monetary values to then the identified technology development and transfer and capacity building support needs. And you can identify these technology development and transfer and capacity building support needs in this barrier analysis as well. So it can be, we need support for the development of regulation that will facilitate investments in renewable energies, for instance, because we don't have a tariff structure that is appropriate for accommodating renewable energies, or you don't have a regulation that allows for the sale of electricity to the grid, etc. This is where you usually request for grants for technical assistance and so forth. And that was it. I think I just went a little bit over time, but I hope it was not too fast and too chaotic for you, but there was a lot of information to cover. Some final take-home points to looking at support needs. Important to map the costs and benefits of NDC actions. When you've done that, you identify national sources of finance and identify gaps to achieve their implementation. This barrier analysis that I described can help you identify the appropriate financial instruments and the targeted support that you will be needing and requesting, which can really help you in sort of identifying and attract the finance from donors and financial institutions. And then finally, assign monetary values to technology and capacity support needed, and include this in the financial support requested. And that was it for the second presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Zlatjana.
Thank you. Thank you, Federico. Thank you for this quite extensive information, and I would say good examples on how countries can start gathering information and where are sources of information for tracking climate finance. Very often countries asking actually from where to start. So I really personally like this OECD database. But also, as you mentioned, for support needed, the countries preparing their national plans and strategies. Some countries have developed, for instance, for NDC roadmap implementation. So that is some kind of the basic point where they can start developing in more detail what is the support needed in the context of the NDC, but also as well for other plans, national plan strategies for adaptation. Also, there are national adaptation plans and other development plans consisting climate issues in them. So these are all information that can be starting point for reporting climate finance support needed and received. So within our regions, we can say in general that countries are, struggling with how to, what information to include, how to start. Some of countries have some systems in the nutshell. Some countries develop some systems, budget tagging, etc., etc. But in general, we can say that developing countries are on their way in reporting climate finance. And also, we are happy to have some countries with examples that can share with us, so we can learn and maybe get some ideas on methods, methodologies, on how to track climate finance support needed and received, and that examples can serve like, maybe starting point for certain countries. So I would like to invite now, before we start with sharing experience from the countries, maybe to ask participants first for questions. Are there some questions for Federico at this point? So I see one hand up. Mr. Samir, please, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Federico, for the presentation. Very informative. It's a simple point of clarification. I'm wondering if the revenue generated from carbon markets is considered among financial resources that need to be reported. If so, please give some clarification about that. Thank you.
Yeah, well, it is not. That's the easy response. Carbon markets, at least the ones with corresponding adjustments, so ITMOs, they are to be reported separately. It's not part of the support aspect. So carbon markets is not really considered, I'd say, support, because it's basically a transaction, a tit for tat. You get the emission reductions, you get the money. So it's a separate reporting component.
Thank you for question, and thank you, Federico, for the answer. I see here one more hand raised, Mr. Kaka Midvani from the Georgia. Kaka, please.
Hello, Snejana. Thanks, Federico, for the presentation. I'd like to use this opportunity and discuss with you about the NDC financial part, so that we are all preparing for the third generation of NDCs. We try to identify what would be the best approach for the investment plans for the NDCs, and you have presented very nicely the technology assessment or investments that need for particular program or policy implementation. My question would be, if there is an examples or some kind of guiding materials that support us to not go so deep in this analysis, to not meet the deadline. So what I mean, as you know, each project has its individual preliminary study phase, where when the particular technology is selected, but having in NDC the rough estimation of the technologies needed and its amount, that's a try to, for us, it's a dilemma to find the golden bridge where we can stop to have this assessment and leave the room the policies or projects in during the implementation phase to have this preliminary analysis of the particular technologies that can be implemented during the NDC period. Thank you very much.
I don't think there is an easy answer to that. I would say countries are at very different stages. I'd say in some cases, you don't even have a full NDC costing. In some cases, there are broad estimations. In some cases, there are detailed investment plans, let's say. few go into aspects of then what are the challenges to make these investments flowing. In very few cases, I've seen the overview of the specific technologies and potential revenue streams, and this much will be covered by national sources, this much will be covered by private sector, and so forth. Those exist as well. But I don't know if you actually were requesting for advice or not, but I would say my advice would be to basically start with what you have. The NDC is based on something. And usually there is more information behind it when you then interact with institutions that have provided the information. What is sort of the contribution that can be provided by, I don't know, transport sector, or the contribution that can be provided by forestry and so forth. Usually there is some information and data. And I mean, time is of the essence. We don't have much time to make these reports. We don't have much time to present a new NDC. And if you need support to make these analyses, just a request for support and finding the institution, and then, I mean, it's a time requiring effort. So I would say just don't worry too much about it. Use what you have in the country. Use wide assumptions. If you don't have exact data, look for neighbors, other study, scientific references if available. Use assumptions, but then take a note of how you can improve in the future. I don't know if that helps in any way.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Federico, for that. And your advice is appreciated.
Thank you very much, Kaka, for your question, and Federico for these extensive answers. I see here one more hand raised. So Raida, please, sorry if I do not pronounce your name properly. Please, floor is yours. Ask your question.
Thank you. It's okay for my name. I'd like to thank Mr. Federico for the two presentations that were very valuable for us. My question, I'd like to, Mr. Federico, if possible, to explain a little bit more the fact how the concessionality aspect is captured or accounted in the financial needs for.
Yes. Well, first of all, it's up to you if you want to consider it. But I think that having at least a discussion internally about how you classify support, it's useful. I think the response I've received from a variety of countries is a sort of a sense of unfairness about financial support being reported as provided by developed countries when there are loans provided at market rates. And they would basically question the value or the identification of that as support in some cases. So the concessionality aspect is basically saying what is different from this financial support to what I could have achieved from the market. So the loan aspect, if we talk about financial instruments, the loan aspect is maybe the easier one to provide again. But let me start in another way. A grant is money that is just given. There is no request usually, unless it's a reimbursable grant. There is no expectation to be repaid. Then we can agree support. I would say the full value of that grant is support provided or received. If you receive a loan, what is the difference between the loan that you received that is reported as support provided versus what you could have gotten in the market, basically? So concessionality in this aspect would be full concessionality for the grant. For the loan, you would take, okay, the bank can give me a loan at an 8% interest rate on the 1 million that I request. This is too much for me. It doesn't make the investment viable. I need a lower interest rate to make the investment make sense. So you look for a donor, a donor says, okay, I can provide you a loan. I will provide it at 4%. That should make the investment bankable for you. Then this is in very simple terms. And then you could take the difference between the 8% and the 4%, and that difference would be the concessionality of the loan that you have received. And that would, some countries argue that that is the support that they have received, not the full amount of the loan in itself. In some cases, as I mentioned, in some countries or certain types of investments, banks wouldn't even consider giving a loan, not even at 12 or whatever percentage, right? So in these cases, can you say that the full amount of the loan is support provided? Some countries say that, but we repay the loan over time. So we didn't actually, I mean, in the end, we end up paying more than we received. So in the end, we didn't receive support, financial support, we received support in accessing the finance. So some countries consider making adjustments. So report the support received at first, the full loan, but then basically for the next reporting period, reports that basically subtract the national payments that they have provided into that amount. It really depends on national preferences, national priorities, what position you bring to the COP, to the discussion and negotiations. So these are things to consider internally, I think, and discuss internally how you see financial support. And I just brought forth concessionality because that has been part of the discussions I've had with other countries, at least.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question and for the answer. I don't see any hands raised. Do we have some questions in the chat?
Yes, we have questions in the chat. What should be the basic elements to communicate on support needed and received? This is a question from Morocco. And the same person is asking, could you please elaborate more on the aspects to make attention not to double count in reporting?
Well, yes. Well, first of all the questions are very good questions, and I'm sorry for not being able to provide straightforward answers for the previous ones, but it's basically what we deal with when we deal with the countries. Basically, it's up to the countries to define things for themselves. This question, I think, is maybe easier. So central elements or basic elements to report is basically, consider it's not a mandatory reporting requirement. Report what you can. If you only have easily accessible data on the funds that have come into national accounts, but you haven't tagged them as climate support yet, maybe you could go to the OECD database and say, look at what developed countries have reported. Can you use that for tagging elements? Maybe. Do you want to go through your own exercise and tag them? But in the end, basically, use whatever information and data you have available, and then consider how you can improve that over time. Because I think it's very valuable for the countries themselves to have that overview. And then also expand on the national sources of finance, both public and private. I think it is, in the end, very helpful to build the financial strategies for your long-term strategies and for the NDC implementation. And the second question, the double counting, basically the tables, they don't allow for double counting between financial support provided and needed and received, and the technology and capacity building components. But there is a possibility for double counting between the financial support provided and the transparency aspects. So I would say keep BTR supports, national communication supports, NDC support, adaptation communication support in the transparency reporting table and not in the financial support. to make sure they're not double counted anyway. Or if you want to report in both places, make sure you cross-reference. So you can cross-reference and provide additional information. You can mention they're also provided in the transparency-related reporting table. Sometimes some national programs might look at different aspects, including transparency. So you can have the full amount in the financial reports, and then in the transparency, you only report the transparency component and mention if it's included in the financial support or not. But just make sure that you provide enough information to differentiate between the two, so you don't double count or are able to subtract.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't see any more questions from the chat, so we can move from this section of the webinar to sharing experience part. Two countries actually were expressed the willingness to share their experiences. I know that many countries are establishing their own systems. At some point, they are not so ready, or they are thinking that they are not so good. But today we will have a chance to hear examples from Sierra Leone and from Georgia. I think that Mr. Gabriel from Sierra Leone is at this point it's not with us, and hope that he will join in the following minutes. So I would ask kindly Mr. Kaka from Georgia to share Georgian experience with us. So Kaka, please, the floor is yours. And thank you very much for participating and sharing so many very, very good experiences with the countries in Eurasia, but also with the other regions, since the experience of the countries and sharing experience is very much evaluated among the participants. And I really can share that Georgia, in the context of the ETF and BTR reporting or preparing elements of BTR, is one of the advanced countries in Eurasia region. So Kaka, I'm very glad to see you today, and thank you very much. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Sujana, for these nice words, and it's really increased our responsibility to meet the requirements when we submit our BTR. And very warm welcome everybody who is with us today, and it's my privilege to share Georgia's example with regards to the climate finance and the newest work we do under this. Let me share with you the example of the climate budget tagging that is supported by the World Bank Group. And for this, we worked in 2023 to have the national budget coverage around 80%. This is our threshold, and we started with several ministries, which has a possibility to dive deep in the budgets in terms of climate change perspective. So with this, we had the time horizon since 2022, where we started the presentations of the climate budget tagging rationale, the best practices available around the globe, and afterwards we decided to concentrate on the climate budget tagging with Ministry of Environmental Protection and Agriculture, which is the coordinator of the climate policy inside the country, followed with the other ministries, and finally we reached to the 6 major ministries of the country. And for this work, we used the methodology that is dedicated for the Georgia specific, and to develop this methodology, we used several international experiences. This was mainly the multilateral development bank's methodologies, OECD experience, best practices from France, Austria, and Indonesia, and also the work that has already been implemented by UNDP. With this, we try to accumulate and have a specific targets for the Georgia perspective, which was translated in the National Public Finance Climate Taxonomy, which is nothing but the list of the possible activities that is dedicated to the climate, either mitigation or adaptation. For this, we have built the taxonomy based on the national NDC, so the national documents, such as an NDC, climate strategy, climate action plan, low emission development strategy, forced national communication, the taxonomy of the national sustainable finance taxonomy of the National Bank of Georgia, and the budgets itself from the Ministry of Economy, Ministry of Infrastructure, Ministry of Environment, Internal Affairs, Health, and Education. Within this analysis and grabbing all of this, grabbing together this activities related to the climate change, we identified this as the following sectors: energy, transport, building, industry, agriculture, waste, forest, coastal resources, water, infrastructure, tourism, health, and education. These are the areas where the national budget tagging are implemented within the country. We did the work in 2023, which was covered the ministerial budget of the country, which is totally 25 billion Georgian lari, and the ministerial budget out of it is, as you see, more than 3/4, so 19 billion. We had 12 ministries in total in Georgia, but we were concentrated only at the biggest share in climate activities in order to see the result that is really tangible for the country. As you see currently on the screen, the 4 ministries work is done, which is presented in a green color. And with these ministries, the results are following, that we were managed to tag 67% of the budget, the ministerial budget. We still need to reach the target, which is the 80%. And with these 4 ministries are as following: the Ministry of Infrastructure and Ministry of Infrastructure and Foreign Information are responsible to renovate the key infrastructural of the country, such as the roads, bridges, which is highly related to the climate adaptation and its effects, its process with the extreme weather events that's occurring inside the country. Ministry of Economy is mostly related to the process which is on communication with the energy developments and also the private sector. So the Ministry of Economy covered both mitigation and adaptation. Ministry of Environment and Agriculture also has the both direction, mitigation and adaptation, but mostly adaptation, because we have the forest sector under this ministry coordination. And the last but not least is the Ministry of Health, which is coordinates mostly the matters related to the health issues and also the peoples with disabilities. So mainly we have here the adaptation activities. The mitigation is also possible, which is related to the renovation of the hospitals. In a line, we have the Ministry of Ministry of Education and Science, and Ministry of Internal Affairs. Ministry of Education mostly would go as the preliminary study shows that if the educational programs include the climate change aspects or how they are addressing the climate change matters within their curriculums. This is our area to dive deeper down. And Ministry of Internal Affairs, since they are responsible for the catastrophes and how they will address it. This is our method to cover it, which is mostly, as most of you can indicate, this is a core part of the loss and damage that we need to have deeper dive inside this work. With this, we managed to have the following results. As I've already mentioned, 67% of the budget was already tagged, and totally you'll see that only 1.7 billion Georgian lari is tagged under this process, which means that only 13% of this ministry's budget is related to either mitigation or adaptation. If you look at this comparison between adaptation and mitigation, of course, the adaptation deserves a little bit more money than the mitigation, since the mitigation requires the technological development inside the country, and this technologies is under considered of support need. So with this example, I tried to share with you how the budget can be considered under the climate finance, which has a nice potential to show all of us the possibility to see the different aspects of the different players inside the government to be involved in a climate change process. So with this, I complete my presentation and would be happy to hear your opinion or questions about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kaka. Now is the time for your questions. I believe that this system that Georgia has developed is very, very interesting. So maybe there will be some points of replication or studying the case and maybe adjusting this system to your country situation. So please, the floor is yours. Ask the questions. I don't see any hands raised. Maybe you are speechless. I am. Since I really know just few countries that has implemented this budget tagging, and to me it seems very, very complicated comparing to this what we just heard. And maybe I can start with some questions. Did you needed to make just complete budgetary, reform in order to implement such a system of climate budget tagging?
In our case, it's do not need to have a huge reforms or something like that. You just need to accommodate as much as possible what is already existing in the country. And currently, Georgia operates with an e-budget, e-treasury system, which already gives us some kind of easy access to the system. What is the most tricky part is you need to go very, very granular level, so to understand what kind of activities you are dealing with. For instance, when you see the program that is dedicated to the renovate of the transmission line, you need to know, is it for increasing the capacity of renewable energy transmit in an electricity system or not? or when you have the subsidies for the high mountains, for instance, we have the subsidies. While the subsidies is proposed, so with energy consumption perspective. So in our case, it supports to have the natural gas, and we know all that natural gas is not climate friendly. But what we have also taken into account, if they don't have this natural gas, they will start consuming the wood, which is not allowed to be cutted. So then we would have otherwise this high emissions. So that was the sort of the methodological circumstances that was described in our system, and that information has provided to the civil servants who work under this budget. And what is really nice thing to find there, that you can identify the activities that never been seen before as a climate related. We are not talking about the expectation from the budget tagging is not to have the primary climate activities identification, because it's of course obvious from the beginning. But you are finding the activities under the budget tagging that has a direct or indirect effect to climate change. And this gives you the clear vision what country's capacity with regards to the expenditures annually, either mitigation or adaptation, and you can fill the puzzle to find the appropriate investments needed and gap analysis in a financial perspective.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, when you mentioned we even do not know at the moment what actions are climate related. So I remember one case when a highway was constructed and it was, counted as climate related at certain points. So each action needs to be considered, analyzed, and then tagged according to the influence on climate actions or climate activities. So also I was wondering, when did you start building this system, took to you to build it and to put it on this level?
It started in 2022. And the Ministry of Environmental Protection and Agriculture was the pilot. Then we extended with the Ministry of Infrastructure and Ministry of Economy, because they are the most biggest contributors for the climate field. And the next iteration, which was the previous year, was the Ministry of Internal Affairs, Internal Affairs, the Health and Education. So with this, we will cover, when we complete this work, and I guess this year is the year where we're gonna to complete the work, we will have around 80% of our budget tagged. The other ministries, such as, for instance, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, doesn't make sense to be tagged, because the Ministry of Foreign Affairs do the international work which is not related to the climate mostly. One of the debate was to have, for instance, their parking, the car vehicles they are using that can be changed and switched to the hybrids or the electric vehicles, but this is not a major case. This is a minor, and this will mostly relate to the public procurements. If we change the public procurements and put there that we need hybrids in the public procurements, then is automatically address Ministry of Foreign Affairs and all other governmental branches. So it doesn't need for that particular case to get their budget.
Okay. Kaka, thank you very much. Any questions for Kaka? I don't see any hands raised. So also I have information that Mr. Gabriel from Sierra Leone just joined to us. Welcome, welcome to this event, and please, if you're ready, the floor is yours. Please share your presentation. We are very wondering to see your case in climate finance tracking, as well as support needed and received. Mr. Gabriel, are you there? Are you ready? Maybe just a few seconds more. Can you hear us? So it seems that at the end he is not with us, unfortunately. So I hope
He
that
is with us. I can see him in the chat, in his name. Maybe he cannot hear us. Gabriel, can you hear us?
Mr. Gabriel, can you hear us? Just a second, maybe he's not ready yet. Mr. Gabriel? Oh yes, I can see he is on the list. So please, if you're ready, the floor is yours. Okay, just a second, please, to be patient. Mr. Gabriel, can you hear us? Sheila, do you have any information from Mr. Gabriel?
Yes, he has put in the chat that he's hearing us, but I think we cannot hear him.
Okay.
Maybe he can rejoin the meeting. Mr. Gabriel, kindly log in again. Maybe then the audio will be more clear. Thank you.
Just a bit more patience now. I hope that we will establish connection with Mr. Gabriel. We are very eager to hear experience from Sierra Leone. So we will wait for a few seconds more up to the minute, and then we'll continue. Or Mr. Gabriel is here on my list, so I can see you as a participant. Can you hear us? I have information that you have admitted at the meeting. Can you hear us now? Mr. Gabriel, Sheila, do you have any information, new information? Because Mr. Gabriel is on the participants list, so I don't know what's going on. Probably some technical issue.
Yes, I do not have the latest, apart from he has just rejoined. I thought the network would be more clear. Maybe we can continue with the program. If he's able to speak, then he will let us know if we are still here. Thank you.
Yeah, this is our last session for this event. So if Mr. Gabriel is not able from any reasons to join us, we can proceed with the mentee questions, with final questions for this event. I will share now my screen. Maybe. Okay. Sorry. I see Mr. Gabriel admitting again. So probably, hopefully, now will be okay. So finally.
So hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Welcome to this event, and thank you very much for joining us. At the end, we thought that you maybe will not succeed to connect with us, so we are very glad to see you.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm also very sorry, at least for the internet glitch. I think I have problem with my laptop, so I had to switch over with my phone to make this intervention on behalf of Sierra Leone. And I'm very much sorry to everyone, at least, for waiting. So I will do this oral reports on behalf of Sierra Leone regarding tracking climate finance with respect to support needed and also support received. So from the side of Sierra Leone, I wish to flesh this into two. Firstly, to start with, how do we track support needed as a country? So especially when it comes to climate finance. So the very first thing we do as a country is we use the UNFCCC different document windows. For example, the NDC, the NAP, of course, National Communications, as a means for us to document support needed. And in doing so, normally we try to do a kind of an assessment to see, firstly, the sectors that we think that are very much vulnerable, and then also within the country to see what are the steps we could take for the different sectors to see how we can be resilient as far as the different aspects concerned, whether it has to do with adaptation or mitigations. And within those streams, we look into one, capacity buildings. That is what capacity needs to be built, and also looking into technology, of course, transfer, and also how we could utilize them. So if you look through our documents that we have, our NAP, the NDC, and of course, National Communication, you can see that we've clearly elaborated the support needed on behalf of Sierra Leone. And normally, some of these documents boils down to us formulating what we call implementation plans. So there are implementation plans that try to cost all of the supports that we need, whether it has to do with capacity building, whether it has to be with whatever technology that we need, that we normally translate in a form of a project. Now, for the national level, what we do at the national level in Sierra Leone is that we have key institutions in Sierra Leone, the EPA and then the meteorological agencies, of which we also try to get into our strategic plans, climate change priorities that we think we could implement. So the government this year has what we call the green budgeting system. So within the green budgeting system, institutions are, of course, some of us that are players to climate change, are obliged to submit and defend our climate change, whatever activities we want to implement. So these are being costed, and then they are there that we look through. So when it comes to support received, the way we track them now is that, like, upon all of these areas of, for example, interventions, what we need, this can be a lot of money. So the tracking, I would tell you that we don't have like a straightforward approach. Like say there is a definite tools, for example, in the country that we are using to track each and every support that are there. because sometimes even when we are developing our NDC, there was a constraint for a kind of a possibility like duplication of effort, also the counting of support received. But the good news is when it comes to the government system, we have the IFMI system, wherein each component that I want to implement is being captured and tied to a budget line. So when you want to know how this thing is being implemented, definitely you can just go through, for example, the Ministry of Finance. They can look through the different activities and they can see that institution A has spent X amount of funds to implement climate finance. An example is like we had this climate change tree planting in Sierra Leone. The government invested a lot for planting of 5 million trees, of which government was rolling out on a quarterly basis some funding. So that's what we are doing. And then also like institutional-wise, like the EP and the Met Agency and other institutions like the MPA, they also try to track all of those things. And then also at the national level, like for climate finance, we also have some projects. Sometimes like we sign MOU with like, let's say, some small NGOs. So we use like the MOUs that we signed that has costed as a means of us tracking what we've been investing in. So that you can sign sometimes a letter of agreement or a kind of like a memorandum of understanding for you to implement sets of projects. For example, recently we're implementing a project with Irish Embassy, of which we've already have a concept note, and then we've signed that one. Similarly, like EP was doing one with IOM, of which they've signed that too. So like for the International Climate Change Fund, for example, the GCF and also the JEF, you know, it's a straightforward thing. So definitely, whenever a project is being approved, you can go through their website, you can see what is being there. And also from our end there, for example, also we try to look into those components of projects and try to see how many of this money is being spent on, for example, in capacity building. How many is spent on, for example, on hard or soft climate interventions. So this is what we're having. So, but the challenge that we are having, and that we are trying to see maybe how this could be solved is that under the CBIT project is that there's a funding of which we're trying to have some tools, definitely to see how we can track some of this support that we are getting in, so at least there can be a one window, a one central stop that we can understand what we've received and then what are the impacts being done as far as it's concerned. Because normally now what we've been doing like for the past NDC is that like we just try to double check what are the projects being implemented, we document those projects, and then we also try to do some window shopping to institutions to see what they are doing. But for the government, they have the IFMI system, the green budgeting that they have introduced this particular year, in which there is a fund for us that are climate change related agencies to implement. So I think I'll stop here for now. So if there are any other further questions, I think I'll be glad to answer to those. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this brief overview of your way of collection, tracking, and reporting of the climate finance information. Yes, as you said, this is your approach is not a straightforward approach, as many countries also doing the same. They are doing with what they have. So very few countries are advanced in this climate finance tracking. So they are struggling with collecting data from sources of data, etc., etc. And it is good to see all this variety of the examples in order to, see maybe where is solution or example that can be applicable to certain countries. So please, I would ask the participants now if they have questions for Mr. Gabriel. Please, the floor is yours. You can raise your hands, of course, and put your questions in the chat box, of course. So we have a few minutes more till we finalize this event. And also, I would like, I know that Mr. Gabriel prepared the presentation with all information that he has already shared with us. And I would ask you to send us to present the presentation, and we will put all information, all presentations at our climate transparency platform. So for all of you that did not participate from the beginning or would like to hear again and see again this webinar, you can approach to the presentations and to the recording after the webinar as soon as technically is possible. We will upload all necessary data at the climate transparency platform. So any questions so far? If not, I just would like to ask you a few questions at the end of this event. So I will share now my screen with instructions and also just a second. Okay. And also I'll share my link in the chat box, so you can approach to the questionnaire. So you have a link. Just a second, I've stopped from some reason. I've stopped sharing my screen. Just a second. Oh, not this one. Okay, you can see now instructions on the screen. You can go directly to the menti.com and use this code for answering the questions. I hope that you can see these instructions. So I will move to the next slide. So from where have you been joining us today? It's the first question. I can see some answers here. This webinar, except of the Euro-Asia region, covering some northern part of the Africa, Anglophone Africa, and the MENA countries. I don't see any countries from any participants from Central Asia, but maybe they will answer. Participants are coming from Euro-Asia. Next question is how satisfied are you with this webinar? Okay, I can see some answers here. Satisfied, very satisfied, neither satisfied or dissatisfied. Thank you very much for your answers. You can also, there is some more. You can also answer on this Menti questionnaire later after this presentation. Also, the next question is your interest in other areas, or what would you like to see in next webinars? I see here 6 responses, like climate finance tracking basics using digital tools. Some more examples in that regard. I know that now we were not in position to deal with the tables that our colleague Federico prepared for you, but I've shared through email 2 tables. They are not official tables for reporting support needed and received, but just for practicing to see how it looks like, etc., etc. So I hope that in near future, maybe during this year, we will have opportunity to go through directly through the tables and to exercise. Also, in regard of more examples, yes, it's really not very easy to find examples because lots of different levels of the climate finance reporting and different experiences, but also our networks are in different time zones. So some examples that we wanted to show you are, very, very far from us. So in regard of the timing, it was not possible. Also, you would like to see introduction to different experts working on BTR to share experiences and lessons. Okay, we will take that into consideration. How to success a review of FTCs, training on the MPGs. We are also already on track with this. CBIT projects, BTR development, NDC tracking tool, etc. Repeating the same, repeating is the mother of the knowledge, I know. Tool and training for climate finance tracking, as I said, due to the huge interest and actually need of the countries to learn more about that, we will arrange some webinars or workshops to train tools, CTFs for tracking climate finance. What aspects? This is continuation, more interaction, longer webinar and exercises, detailed examples, more country experience. Some of you would like shorter presentations or webinars, some of you longer, so different opinions, more interactive sessions. Yes, we very much pay attention on that to have interaction with, because experience sharing and communicating between the countries is crucial for sharing the experiences and gaining new information and knowledge. So we will try to do better on that. So at the end, I would like to thank you so much for joining us today. And also thank you very much for Federico, who has a very, very not easy task today. So Federico, thank you very much. Also, thank you, Mr. Kaka and Mr. Gabriel from Georgia and from Sierra Leone for sharing their experiences. And of course, all materials will be uploaded at the Climate Transparency platform for your future references. And also you can use our platform for forums with this or some other subject to ask us, and you can approach actually to us with your questions anytime. So we are here to support you. Thank you very much. And I hope very much that we will see you soon. So goodbye, everyone. Have a nice rest of the day.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
You are receiver.
Goodbye. Thank you. And bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.